while we do miss seeing each other in person and engaging, having coffee across the table from each other, I hope that we will take advantage of this particular platform to engage with our global partners and engage across boundaries and permeable borders so that we can address a variety of issues that are so important to us as higher education scholars. As I begin my remarks today, I just want to highlight a few things that keep me awake at night. As a scholar of higher education, one of the significant impacts of COVID is the ways in which this particular pandemic has had and will probably continue to have an impact on the overall structure of higher education. While the COVID pandemic is not a new, while COVID in and of itself is probably an event that has impacted us in our current history in ways that perhaps we have not been impacted in the past. We do know that when we look at the history of higher education, there have been other historical moments when we've experienced challenges, we've experienced events that have altered higher education. But at this particular moment, there are a number of issues that are quite significant. One, just the health, safety, and well-being of our students, of our faculty, of our staff. I mean, right now, we're really concerned about just showing up places, being able to do our work, being able to deliver, conduct our research, being able to engage in teaching and learning, being able to engage with our communities through our engagement and outreach activities. These are the fundamental and the core principles that embody what we do as higher education institutions. And just the mere fact that we have had to fundamentally rethink how we do this work to remain safe and healthy keeps me awake at night. But I think more fundamentally, if we look at the history of higher education, universities by their nature are quite notorious for being sticklers for tradition. We are steeped in tradition that sometimes can hamper our ability to be nimble, to be malleable. However, I think many of us will agree that in March, when many of us, around March or April, when many of us transitioned to virtual programs and had to be innovative at a moment's notice, essentially, we had to respond and to continue the business and the work of the university in ways that perhaps we would not have imagined if we had just a normal semester where we were considering maybe transitioning to online programs or integrating these other media into the day-to-day work that we do. It is also important to think about, what that transition has meant or means for higher education. Yes, we know that there are many institutions that have dabbled with and integrated virtual programs as part of their curriculum. We do have fully online universities or programs. But I think, as many of us would agree, and many of you would agree, that there have always been all sorts of debates regarding the quality of education that some of these platforms afford us, and the opportunities that our students get by participating. But COVID did not give us the option not to engage. All of a sudden, Zoom became the only way, or one of the few ways in which we now engage with one another, including at this very fine conference and this event and this meeting of scholars that we now have. And yes, there have been some significant challenges. I think one of the highlights or one of the issues that has emerged as a concern through using these virtual platforms, the disparities that have existed within higher education that I think in many ways are being highlighted and being brought to the surface by the fact that we now have we have to respond to this particular pandemic. So as an example, if we're looking at access to technology, I think while many of us are using this platform and it has indeed afforded us the opportunity to engage, we do see racial, ethnic, and class disparities in the ways in which technology is used, in the ways in which technology is accessed. We have students for whom this is simply not a consistent, a viable, a reliable mechanism by which they can engage, at least not in a reliable, in a consistent way. And even among faculty, I mean, we do have faculty members who, for many of us, use technology on a day-to-day basis. This is what we do. But even the transition in terms of how we integrate technology, for example, in some of our fine and applied arts, where technology might be very useful, but in other cases, it has proven to be a bit of a challenge when you have to have a group of students come into a classroom and perform. So technology in many ways has indeed been an avenue that has opened up certain opportunities, but I think also it continues to raise those concerns and those disparities that have been so deeply embedded, but now are indeed in our faces. And we simply cannot ignore the fact that segments of our student population, segments of our staff do not have access and cannot indeed perform and engage in the ways in which they would like to engage. Some of the other challenges that continue to exist. We are global in our outreach, we're global in our engagement. And I think we do see some disparities between institutions that have access versus those that do not have access. But I think in other ways, I have found myself as somebody who does a lot of international work, engaging with partners that I otherwise would not have had an opportunity to engage with on a day if I didn't get on a plane and travel. So yes, these are some of the issues that provide a broader context within which we have to engage our issues. But I would be remiss, particularly as a scholar who has devoted a significant amount of my time studying international issues. One of the most glaring impacts of this pandemic has been on our international students, particularly when we're looking at US institutions and the ways in which we have positioned ourselves vis-a-vis other institutions globally. This year, I think we know that many of our international students who are outside the US have not been able to return to pursue their academic programs at US institutions for a variety of reasons. In some countries, embassies and consulates are closed because or have limited hours and limited access. In some cases, just the sheer availability or lack thereof of flights to be able to travel because of health and safety issues. And all of these variables have had all sorts of devastating impacts on the ways in which US institutions in particular, and institutions across the world are able to do their work. So I'm sure over the course of the time that we're going to have together, we do have a wonderful panel of other colleagues who can bring in other perspectives. But I wanted to begin this conversation by highlighting these broader concerns, because higher education does not exist in a vacuum. And we have to be mindful of the broader social, political, cultural, economic factors that impact how universities respond and engage. And as we think about our post-COVID existence, we have to be mindful of these broader social, economic, political, and cultural factors that will continue to impact how we respond. So let me pause here and invite colleagues to join in as we address some of the other questions that will be posed to us throughout this panel.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for the introductions. And I would like to invite, which one mention, let's say, I will begin with our current chair, and I would like to invite Hugo Garcia from Texas Tech.
Excellent comments. Obviously, we've seen various external events that affect campuses in terms of how the outlook, in terms of how they operate, policies and procedures. One of them previously being 9/11 and how that affected Muslim students. With the COVID-19, another external events that have been affected institutions and has real global ramifications. And we saw with 9/11, some of the policies within the United States that were quite stringent, that really pushed students from around the world to look elsewhere And we see that this pandemic, as you stated very eloquently, embassies, US embassies around the world, either closing or having very limited operations, that really hinder students' ability to come to the United States. That how do you see this other external event, right? Not caused by institutions, but external events, whether it be 9/11 or this particular COVID-19, how this can somewhat, I guess, level the playing field for other institutions that are trying to increase their international status in terms of the recruitment of scholars, international students, and even funding, as we see with Brexit in the United Kingdom. There are various political, socioeconomic, geopolitics that are in place. But how are other institutions around the world leveraging this, for lack of a better term, to level the playing field with other Western institutions, but particularly the United States?
I think one of the impacts that we're seeing here is not just COVID, but also with particular reference to the United States, the current political climate. Over the past few years, we have seen a gradual erosion of potential opportunities that used to draw students, particularly international students, to this country. And these are varied. They range anywhere from what we now see most recently, the conversation around the elimination of the duration of status requirement, which would afford international students the opportunity to come and study in the United States for as long as it took to complete their program. And now there is a proposal by the Department of Homeland Security to eliminate that option, where there would be a fixed period of time where students would be able to pursue their course of study. And if they needed to stay in the US beyond that course of study, they would have to apply. And of course, all of these applications come with fees, which are also being increased. That's just one very recent example. And there are many others. There's a threat to the H-1B process, which again is a mechanism by which many US institutions draw talent from across the world to come and pursue professional, postdoctoral, and other opportunities in this country. So the general tenor and tone when one looks at the US, looking in from the outside, it looks quite inhospitable. Universities, and I can certainly speak, in talking with colleagues from a variety of institutions, universities in this country continue to be committed to diversity, continue to be committed to global excellence and global inclusivity. However, the noise that surrounds the context within which these institutions exist and reside is deafening and challenging when students have to make choices and decisions about where to go. When we engage with partners from other institutions, so for example, if we were to look at our colleagues to the north in Canada, Canadian institutions have seen a significant increase in the number of applications of international students, because there is a perception, again, that the US is inhospitable. Therefore, students are choosing to explore other options. So to maybe offer a more direct response, one of the impacts is that other countries around the world are in some ways reaping the benefits of what we in the US see as an inhospitable environment for our students. And indeed, we are, if we were to compare notes with our counterparts in other parts of the world, we are seeing other centers of interest and other centers of education. If you're looking at Australia, it is an alternative destination. There are other parts, if you're looking at even a country like South Africa, which has become an alternative destination for the African continent. So those students are now actually looking at South Africa as a desirable destination to pursue their education versus going abroad. So indeed, it's not just COVID, it is also the current climate that unfortunately has created an environment and noise that makes this country less attractive. And then when we see the onslaught of other immigration policies that are being passed or being debated, even if they don't ever become law, but the fact that they are in the public sphere being debated does indeed create a less than welcoming environment for our students.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this excellent question and this lovely conversation with a lot of thoughts for food. And really, it's very unique opportunity right now to revisit the mission of higher education and to think how those universities in the US and all over the world, they will respond to crisis. And with this short comment, I would like to invite a student. Let's begin with Sarah. And Sarah, please introduce yourself. And I assume that as an international doctoral student, you will have some questions and concerns.
Yes, Dr. Papadimitriou, thank you so much. My name is Sarah Maria Schiffecker. I am originally from Austria. I have been studying at the University of Vienna and then came to Texas Tech, and now am in my first semester of the PhD program in higher education. Dr. Garcia is my advisor. And one of my main research interests is international higher education, international students. What are their challenges? What are the problems they are faced with? And of course, especially now during COVID-19, those challenges are significantly increased. Dr. Mabukela, I have a few questions that I just noted down and that would be really interesting to get your expert opinion on. And one of the ones that is closest to my heart is, in your opinion, what have higher education institutions learned so far from this global health crisis? How to best accommodate their international student communities? Have there been any takeaways so far? Is there anything that has already changed maybe in the way institutions treat their international students?
Oh, absolutely. There are many lessons learned, and I think we're all continuing to learn and to compare notes with one another. But one of the first concerns that we had dates back to let's say March, April, the spring semester at the beginning of the pandemic, when many of us had students studying abroad, in international and domestic students studying abroad on various programs, education abroad programs. And one of our first concerns was, how were we going to bring all of those students home safely? That was our primary concern. The landscape was changing in ways that we did not completely understand at that time. And not only was it changing rapidly. And just to give you an example, at the University of Illinois, we had over 850 students studying across the world. And our primary concern was to ensure that those students, the staff, the faculty that were working with those students were brought home safely. So I think, and I can give examples from other institutions where we were comparing notes. We were all going through what was a very tenuous set of conditions, and we were saying, how do we do this? What are you doing on your campus? On and on and on. So I think there, the one lesson learned is that, and the one very early in this process, the one lesson that emerged is that I saw a level of cooperation and information sharing across institutions in ways that perhaps I hadn't experienced before. We colleagues were reaching out to each other. My counterparts, other senior international officers, comparing notes. It was just such a wonderful opportunity. We were dealing with a crisis, And everybody was, our primary concern, irrespective of where we sat institutionally, was to ensure the safety and health and well-being of our students and staff and faculty members. And then, of course, then we brought students home, and for the most part without incident. But then we had to start thinking about the semester. Students had to complete their work. They had to graduate. They had to continue doing research. And again, that was another key lesson learned. The need to be malleable and to be responsive. As I indicated, many of our faculty members had to literally transition in about a week. That's about all we had, more or less, week or two, maybe at the most, to be able to ensure that students' academic programs were not disrupted. And we had to move forward and make it work. Another lesson learned, we then had to start planning for the summer and the fall semester as we began this year. And it became, I think at first we were quite hopeful, many of us, that after the summer, the tide would shift and we would be returning to campus more in person than not. But as the reality now indicates, that's not quite what we had hoped for. And so the other, one of the lessons learned was to then figure out how particularly we were going to engage and support our students, especially not just our international students, but all of those students who would not be able to come back to campus. Because we had a significant number of international students who are not able to, but of course we also have other students, our domestic students, who, some of them just did not feel comfortable with the COVID trajectory. Was a bit of an unknown. And then for some who may have had health issues, the whole range and the whole spectrum of challenges that universities had to deal with. So we had to then think about what would be the innovative ways in which we not only accommodate students, but ensure that our students have a high quality academic experience, perhaps in ways that in which we had not anticipated. So I think many institutions, particularly over the summer, we spent a significant amount of time preparing in a very intentional way. We no longer now just had 2 weeks. We had, all of the summer to get ready for the fall. And some examples, let me just give you an example. One of the things that we've done, for quite a number of years at the University of Illinois is host an in-person pre-arrival orientation for our international students, where we used to get on a plane and bring a team of 10 to 12 University of Illinois staff, faculty, administrators to China and to South Korea. And this year we had planned to go to India. And it became very evident that that was not going to happen. We were not getting anybody on a plane to go anywhere. And so one of the things that we had to do, and that we actually did remarkably well, was we developed a series of virtual orientations. And what that allowed us to do was not only reach students in the countries where we historically have traveled to, but we expanded this program to include students in other parts of the world where we historically had not traveled. So we had a virtual orientation in the Middle East, in Northern Africa. We had one that covered parts of Europe, and then one that covered parts of sub-Saharan Africa, in addition to our traditional destinations where we've historically gone in person. So what that actually did was provide a series of 4 virtual orientations. Our staff were up at all hours of the day and night to accommodate time differences, but we were committed to ensuring that our students remained connected to the university and were not disadvantaged by the fact that this year we were not able to travel, or this year we were not able to see them in person. So we really went out of our way to make sure that those opportunities to engage continued to be available, and even became more available to other parts of the world where we historically have not engaged. In addition to one of the some of the other things that we're now doing, particularly as we look forward to the next year, is that our admissions office, just as an example, has now created an entire platform where students can have one-on-one consultation with admissions counselors, where before, typically you would have a group of students come and do a visit to campus, but now we've actually created a platform where students can have a lot more attention one-on-one because they're not able to visit campus and have this physical presence and walk, the grounds of our various institutions. So I think one of the perhaps positive outcomes from this COVID experience is that universities have become truly innovative. And I should indicate that one of the biggest one of our biggest opportunities has come in the way in which we collaborate with our global partners. Those partnerships have been invaluable. Because we could not bring international students to campus, one of the things that not only the University of Illinois, but many other institutions have done is connect with their global partners in parts of the world where our students are. So we have a sizable population of students, like many universities in the US, who come from China. So we connected with our partners in China, and those partners have been offering a residential experience for our students. So which means that our students are, of course, enrolled in our virtual courses here at the University of Illinois, but they're actually living in residence at various institutions, partner institutions that we have in China. And for us, it's predominantly in China, but as we look into the spring semester, we're exploring other partners as well. And I've engaged with colleagues from other institutions who have shared very similar experiences where they have engaged with partners from other parts of the world to accommodate international students who cannot have that residential experience here. So I think, and vice versa. As we look into the spring semester, many institutions are exploring reciprocal agreements and arrangements where we can also offer access to our virtual courses and our online courses to international partners whose students would have liked and would have ordinarily had an opportunity to come and visit in the US, but given the current climate have not been able to do so. So we are giving them an opportunity for virtual engagement and virtual participation in this academic experience.
Thank you very much. Very innovative. And I think the crisis brings somehow social responsibility to universities, not only just to care about the students, but at least seem like they care. However, they do their best in order to accommodate particular needs. And with this short thought, maybe I will invite Gerardo Blanco from Boston College to continue this lovely conversation.
Thank you. I actually would, I think there are many thoughts that are coming to mind, and I would maybe just invite a couple of threads to the conversation. So rather than posing a question, what I would like to do is maybe think about the role of the senior internationalization officer. I think in some ways, this role has been changing. And I also just thinking that in this panel, we have such an array of perspectives. Of course, we have a colleague that brings years of experience as an academic and as a senior internationalization officer. We also have academics, but we also have the future of our field, which is our graduate students with us. So rather than me being the one who poses a question, maybe I would invite, if I may, Tessa, if there are any reflections that you want to share or a question, and then maybe we go from there to Joe after that. So Tessa, if you can take it away, please.
Thank you, Gerardo. Thank you, Dr. Mabukela. That was a really interesting outline of some of the challenges we're facing. Just sort of bouncing off what Sarah asked and what you were discussing, I was wondering, during this time, as students and as teaching assistants, we've seen some of our courses being moved online to remote forms of teaching and learning. And although these are taking place with participants, students and teachers that are often across countries and time zones, the way we run classes seems sort of closer to remote learning rather than what we might call virtual mobility or or a collaborative online international learning. So I was wondering, do you see this as an opportunity for shifting the way institutions internationalize from solely student mobility to maybe more comprehensive forms of internationalization? And if so, what do you see some of the challenges ahead for us to do that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Tessa, in that, you know, the current climate, forced us to move in the direction and move rather quickly. And I think that provided, because we were experimenting somewhat in some cases. I mean, I think there are some institutions perhaps that were already well poised and ready in engaging in these virtual climate, spaces, or more than others, more robustly than others. But others were sort of thrust in the deep end and had to swim. And I see both challenges and opportunities. And I think some of the challenges I articulated in my opening remarks, challenges to technology, really having to transition rather rapidly, to a platform where, faculty, students, graduate assistants, graduate research assistants have varying degrees of expertise and comfort with. But I do also see some opportunities in that we are expanding the discourse a little bit. So one of the things that that you highlighted is the fact that if we're engaging in these platforms, right now there is a segment of our higher education world where we're engaging these things perhaps asynchronously, because now we're dealing with students from Illinois to California, to India, to South Africa, you name it. We're all over the world and trying to have a synchronous class experience. When somebody has to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can imagine that it can be a real challenge. So we're all trying to sort of figure out how to be accommodating, be humane to our students and to the instructors and others that might be involved in these experiences, so that they continue to be, intellectually stimulating. And you're right. I mean, in that example, we might find ourselves resorting to the more, asynchronous platform. There are other examples where perhaps the more synchronous mode of instruction makes more sense. So I think one of the things, of course, that this offers us is to really think about what makes the most sense given the teams of students or groups of students that we might be dealing with. If a faculty member perhaps finds themselves, working with students who are quote unquote more local, even if they're in a virtual space, but they're all at least within the same time zone, or give or take an hour, it might afford different opportunities. But I think one of the things is, that in one of the opportunities that I particularly appreciate is that because we're all in this together. And when I say all, universities, all the way from the top, most senior administrators, all the way down, have had to pivot rather rapidly. And we're all experimenting. I mean, I think there's a level of this where we're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. We thought plan A might work, but it doesn't. Therefore, we have to pivot and try plan B, C, and D. And because we're all in it together, I think the barriers are somewhat lowered, at least from where I sit. I think we're a little bit more willing to accommodate each other if things don't quite work as well as we thought they might work, or as what we had envisioned they might work, just because the sand keeps shifting under our feet. And I think we should probably seize that. From where I sit, I think see this as an opportunity where we can say, let's seize this opportunity and try maybe even the most, most innovative, the craziest ideas that we have, because we can do it with, the stakes are high, yes, in the sense that eventually we have to get it right, but at least there's a willingness and a willingness to accommodate each other if we miscalculate it. I do think that there are some challenges, as I mentioned before, but I'd like us to think about how we move beyond COVID. I think some of the innovations that we're seeing right now will probably remain a part of higher education. I fundamentally believe that we've made some pivot in the ways in which, when we return to normal, the normal is simply not going to be the normal that we knew in January or in December of 2019. It'll be a fundamentally different normal because we've had to. And I think in the process of experimenting and a process of adaptation, we've identified areas and opportunities that perhaps might have taken us 10, 15 years when, when things are comfortable and normal in the ways in which we've known them to be. So I fundamentally believe that, even when we return in our post-COVID existence, there are elements and components of what we're doing now that we will carry with us. And if we're talking about internationalization, one of the wonderful conversations that I'm now hearing is how we internationalize in a more comprehensive way. How do we integrate the international and the global experience for those students who might otherwise not get on a plane and go far away? I think for the longest time, study abroad was sort of seen as the dominant way in which students acquired, particularly at the undergraduate level, acquired that international and that global experience. And increasingly, and I think that's the wonderful thing for higher education right now, is that I'm increasingly now hearing, how do we take courses that currently exist and infuse international and global perspectives, so that all of our students who otherwise might not have had an opportunity to engage, when they leave University X or University Y, and this is happening fairly widely, they will have that global experience and have integrated and infused in their academic experience. And there seems to be a little bit more of an intentionality in engaging that. It's no longer lip service where we say, yes, yeah, we have 5 courses over here, that have international content, and then the remaining 100 don't, or maybe they might have 1 or 2 readings. So I think there is a wonderful opportunity here, really, where we could fundamentally realign our own thinking as universities about how we integrate in a very intentional, in a very deep way, and in a very integrated way, the global and the international in our just day-to-day experience, so that when our students leave campus, irrespective of whether they get on a plane and go to someplace far away and spend a semester or 2 semesters, we fundamentally know that they have developed that global consciousness as part of their academic experience.
Excellent, thank you. Joe, I wonder if you have any reactions to our ongoing conversation, or any questions that you would like to pose and to bring into the discussion as well.
Yes, thank you, Gerardo. My name is Joe. I'm a second-year doctoral student at Boston College. My research area is in international student mobility, and as a Chinese citizen coming and growing up from China, my observation and analysis largely come from the standpoint of Chinese population who are international students, international scholars, who are currently in the middle of this very complicated situation with not only COVID-19, but also the geopolitical change, the decoupling discourse between China and the US, and even so-called Cold War. And we have witnessed how the Trump administration have been setting up barriers against Chinese researchers and Chinese students coming to study in the US and do research in the US. And with those Chinese scholars who have returned to China, they also face barriers of accessing information, participating in Zoom presentations and conferences. On the other hand, we have also seen researchers shown that over the past 10 years in the United States, the state defunding in higher education is correlated with significant increase in full fee paying international students, many of them coming from China. So from my observation, a lot of Chinese students are concerned of coming to study in the US, and many of them are turning to options in other English-speaking countries with friendlier policy, such as Canada, UK, and even Hong Kong, Singapore, many other places. So my question is, within COVID-19 and with the geopolitical change going on internationally and the social justice mission going on within the US domestically, what are your current priorities right now trying to achieve your international mission in such a big public university while facing a potentially declining international student population? Thank you.
Well, you know, the University of Illinois has been doing international work for more than a century. We, at our institution, admitted 1/3 of all international students who studied in the US in the first part of the last century and graduated those students. So we've been at this for quite a while, and I believe that it is a true testament to the commitment that our institution has had for over a century. And at various points throughout the 100-year history of our global engagement, there have been periods where the political environment has been challenging, as we now see. But I think one of the things that that higher education institutions need to understand as we engage in international work is that we cannot be in and out and only engage when things are going well. I think if we look at the expansion of higher education and international higher education in particular, those institutions that have been most successful are the ones who have stayed the course, even when conditions are not ideal. I firmly believe that international education by its nature requires a sustained engagement and sustained effort. And while right now we are experiencing some challenging times in the landscape of higher education broadly, and perhaps international higher education more specifically, I firmly believe that we will come through. I mean, history demonstrates that there have been other periods that have been difficult, and we've come through. We've been successful. The Institute of Higher International Education, IIE, has done quite a number of reports that have charted and demonstrated how international education has weathered the storms, so to speak, the various storms, economic storms, political storms, etc., you name them, over a 100-year period. And if you were to look at any of those reports, what is very clear is that institutions of higher education are very resilient. So right now, while I don't have a clear answer of when things will calm down, and while I would be hopeful that we will return to a more inclusive narrative in a more inclusive environment, what I can say is that institutions, universities in this country continue to be wedded to those ideals and continue to support and continue to embrace those ideals. And I firmly believe that we will emerge, and we will continue to be strong advocates of inclusivity in this country. Of course, we are also seeing other centers of excellence emerging globally. And I think because so many of us at this particular juncture in the US have had to seek out and collaborate and partner and engage with our global partners, we have in some ways really created an environment globally, an environment of what I call global excellence, because we've had to reach out to each other and inherently and implicitly engage with one another to be able not only to understand the current pandemic, but also to understand other ways in which higher education can perhaps operate differently than we've historically operated. So there are some opportunities here. I think emerging out of a context that is filled with pressures and challenges, perhaps, but I do think that institutions of higher education have responded in ways that demonstrates that they are resilient, they can be innovative, and they are continuing to reach out and collaborate in spite of the current conditions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, really, your answers give us some positive view for the future, maybe. However, maybe those happen in a few universities in the top, and there are some other universities that are not in the middle, but some comprehensive universities around the country, I mean in the US, and they fire faculty, they fire international colleagues working at the international offices because simply they don't have a job, and really operate like a commercialized product instead of universities. What do you have to say about that? where is the social responsibility for those universities that only they check some boxes in the terms of diversity, inclusiveness, globalization, and in the reality, they're doing totally different things. And there is no anyone to help, either faculty, either administrators, they're without a job.
One of the things that the US has is a great diversity in the types of institutions that we have. We have more than 4,000 institutions of higher education in this country. They're different within, I mean, there are of course clusters and groups of, if we were to use the traditional, Carnegie classification of institutions, but there's quite a bit of variation in terms of the cultures of those institutions, the fiscal well-being of those institutions, and many other variables. So one of the things, of course, that I don't want to gloss over and minimize is that this pandemic has had a significant impact, financial impact on all universities, including, what one would consider, comprehensive research institutions across the country. So all of us in the higher education world are going to have to figure out how we emerge and address the fiscal impact that this pandemic has had on higher education institutions. Just something as simple as, just as keeping our universities safe. If you're talking about, cleaning up constantly and buying, equipment, cleaning supplies to make sure that we keep our students, our staff, our faculty safe, our building safe. I mean, that is just an expense that goes above and beyond what we normally would spend in a typical year. So I don't want to create the impression that universities, some universities are not being impacted. We're all going to be impacted, and I fully expect that for the next 2 to 3 years, we are going to be feeling the impact, the financial impact of this pandemic. Of course, how we respond to it is still an unknown, because many of us are going through and trying to understand COVID in and of itself, and then trying to figure out what the appropriate responses are. I think what the earliest responses from the universities were characterized by such concerns about safety. And then now that I think for many institutions, feel like we have some sense of, the climate, at least around, health and safety, be it through testing, be it through offering only virtual programming, a whole host of other, so that was the initial set of responses. But I think the true cost of what this pandemic is or will be to higher education institutions will not really fully reveal itself for another few years. And yes, some institutions will likely go to, as some have already, will likely go to reducing staff. Others will go to furloughs. Others will employ a range of other responses to try and address the financial impact. And there are some institutions that will not survive. That is just the reality of it. Which ones those are, how we respond, I don't have a crystal ball here, but I do think that given the diversity of institutions that exist in this country, the examples that you're giving, where some institutions have responded fairly immediately with a reduction of staff across various units on their campuses, will become a reality over the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you. And I would like to invite probably the last question, Hugo, because I think soon we'll be out of time, and we appreciate your time. And Hugo, can you?
Yeah, thank you, Antigone. I'm always reminded of Winston Churchill's "Never let a good crisis go to waste." In how the types of traditions, colleges and universities are very traditional institutions, as you eloquently stated at the beginning of your presentation, and very recalcitrant when it comes to any deviation from what institutions have historically done. And I think this particular crisis has forced, as you also stated, institutions to kind of look in the mirror to really ask themselves, you know, can we really change, right? Because institutions that I know, I have colleagues around the country who say, we will never do online. We will never go virtual, right? We would never have the types of programs that other institutions do, because that's not who we are. And understanding that, you know, Harvard and many of the Ivy League schools and many of these private residential institutions have changed, really forces us to all really look in the mirror and say, what can we do differently that really increases access to both international and domestic students, but really providing opportunities to truly engage as global institutions and local, you know, the whole idea of global. And so what do you see as, you know, as the last thing in terms of having a very positive aspect of what are some of the positives that really could come out of all this? And you've already alluded to some, but, you know, in terms of a nice little wrap of what's the positive of all this negative feelings we've been having recently because of the closing of institutions, the lack of international scholars being able to come back. What are some of the positives that can come out of this?
Yeah, I think, you know, you've touched on a few of them. One, innovation. This pandemic has forced us to be innovative. I think initially when we pivoted and had to switch our modes of instruction or modes of engagement, it was out of necessity. But through that process, we have found ways to really be innovative in the ways in which we not only engage our students, but engage our partners, engage our research, engage sort of the day-to-day work of the university. So I think that's a wonderful opportunity. As a scholar of international higher education, engagement, global engagement and partnership, I think historically the relationship sometimes with partners was imbalanced. What the pandemic has done is force us to be this is an equal opportunity pandemic in the sense that we've all been impacted globally and we've all had to sink or swim together. And I think when one looks at ways in which we now engage with our partners, we have seen value perhaps with our partners, our international partners, in ways that perhaps we just historically haven't, or the scales were perhaps a little bit skewed in one direction. And in some ways, this pandemic has had somewhat of a leveling effect because we've had to figure out collectively and collaboratively with our global partners how to arrive at solutions and how to arrive at innovations, opportunities that work in the best interest of all teams involved. So innovation, definitely, and sort of a different type and level of collaboration with global partners. And I think it has also provided us an opportunity to, you know, break some barriers in the sense that we have engaged and perhaps ventured into territory where historically we might have been a bit tentative to go, because universities, as you said, are steeped in tradition. We don't do this, we don't do that. Here, we don't have the luxury to not do this or do the other, whatever that this or the other might be. And so as we've experimented, because we are in a space where we frankly needed to respond quickly, perhaps we've gone in and ventured into territories where we might otherwise have not realized opportunities quite as quickly as we have, because we were tentative and we were so restrained and constrained by our deeply held beliefs about who we are and what we should and should not be doing. So in some ways we've unshackled ourselves here. But really, I would be remiss to not, as much as I want to end on a positive note, that, you know, the broader context, in addition to COVID, the broader, you know, political context in this country, not just around international, but also around, how Black and Brown people in this country, that's a layer of complexity that has also impacted how higher education responds. So I don't think that we can have a truly genuine conversation in higher education institutions and not only acknowledge, but think intentionally and act about what our role as universities and institutions of higher education is going to be to address persistent social injustices in this country. That is part of our social responsibility as well as we move forward. So on that note, I would like to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. And I look forward to joining parts of the conference. And thank you again, colleagues, for engaging me and giving me this opportunity to share my insights.